The click of that heavy oak door still echoes in my mind when the house gets too quiet at night. It was July 1945, and the world thought the fighting was mostly over. In Europe, the guns had gone silent in May, and the boys were either heading home or waiting for orders to go to the Pacific. I was just a corporal then, 22 years old, with dirt from the Siegfried line still under my fingernails and a hollow feeling in my chest that wouldn't go away. I'd seen things in France and Germany that a man shouldn't see in 10 lifetimes, things I've spent 80 years trying to forget. But the thing that haunts me the most isn't a battlefield. It isn't the sound of a mortar or the smell of a burnt-out Tiger tank. It's a conversation. A handful of words spoken by powerful men in a room where I was never supposed to be. I was standing guard outside a study in a requisitioned manor near Potsdam. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and old dust. I remember looking at my boots, wondering if I'd ever get the scuffs out, when I heard a voice through the wood of the door. It wasn't loud, but it had a weight to it that made the hair on my arms stand up. They were talking about a city I'd never heard of. They were talking about a sun that would fall from the sky. And I realized right then, in that hallway, that the world we had just fought so hard to save was already gone, replaced by something much darker. I've kept that secret in a box in my mind for 8 decades, but I'm 92 now, and the box is starting to leak. I think it's time I told someone what a tired corporal heard while the world was celebrating a peace that wasn't really a peace at all. You see, by the time I got to Potsdam, I was already a ghost of the boy who had left Ohio in 1943. I'd been through the hedgerows of Normandy, where every inch of greenery felt like a trap. I'd lost my best friend, a kid named Silas who played the harmonica, in a muddy ditch outside a town whose name I can't even remember anymore. We were just infantry. We didn't know the big picture. We just knew the man to our left and the man to our right. We knew that when the whistle blew, you moved, and you didn't stop moving until the shouting stopped. By the time the Germans surrendered, I was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. They pulled a few of us from our units because we had clean records and we could stand still for 8 hours without complaining. They gave us fresh uniforms, M1s that actually shone, and told us we were the face of the American occupation. We felt like frauds. We were killers, dressed up like parade soldiers. But we did what we were told. That's how I ended up in that hallway, listening to the men who decided the fate of millions like they were discussing a grocery list. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember the smell of that manor house. It smelled like damp stone and stolen history. The Germans who lived there before had fled, leaving behind paintings and heavy furniture that felt too big for the room. My post was right outside the library. I was told not to move, not to speak, and most importantly, not to listen. But when you're 22 and the world is shifting under your feet, you can't help but strain your ears. There were 3 men inside. I didn't know all their names then, only that they were the kind of men who wore stars on their shoulders and had eyes that looked like they'd seen the end of time. One of them had a voice like gravel, deep and low. He was talking about the tests in the desert. He said the flash was brighter than 1,000 mornings. I remember thinking he was being poetic, maybe had a bit too much scotch. But then the other one spoke. He said the target had to be industrial, but civilian enough to break the spirit. He mentioned Hiroshima. He said the word slowly, like he was tasting it. Hiroshima. It sounded like a prayer or a curse. At the time, I didn't even know where it was. I thought it was just another island, another scrap of land we had to bleed for. But then he said the phrase that has stuck in my throat for 80 years. He said, "It's not just a bomb, it's the end of history." I stood there, my hands shaking slightly against the wood of my rifle. I kept thinking about Silas. I kept thinking about the boys who were still on ships heading toward Japan, thinking they were going to have to storm those beaches just like we did at Omaha. I wanted to burst through that door and tell them that we'd had enough of the end of history. We'd seen enough death, but I was just a corporal. I was a nobody. I stayed at my post, and I watched those men walk out an hour later. They looked satisfied. They looked like they'd just closed a successful business deal. One of them even nodded at me, a polite little tip of the head, before walking down the stairs to have dinner. I stood there in the silence of that hallway, and I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the weather. It was the realization that the men in charge weren't like us. They didn't see the mud or the harmonica players. They saw maps and numbers, and they were about to use a power that made our rifles look like toys. The next few weeks were a blur. I was moved to a different detail, guarding a supply depot. But I couldn't stop thinking about that word, Hiroshima. I'd look at the other guys, my buddies who were talking about going home and getting married or buying a Ford, and I felt like I was looking at them from the bottom of a deep well. I knew something they didn't. I knew that the world they were dreaming of was a fantasy. On August 6th, when the news finally broke, I wasn't surprised. While everyone else was cheering and throwing their hats in the air, I went behind one of the supply sheds and threw up. I remembered the voice through the door. I remembered the gravelly tone saying it would break their spirit. I realized then that I was a witness to the birth of a new kind of fear. We had won the war, but we had lost something else. Something about being human. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. Sometimes I wonder if I should have said something sooner, but who would have listened to a kid from Ohio? In those days, you did your job and you kept your mouth shut. That was the code. You didn't talk about what you saw in the woods, and you certainly didn't talk about what you heard in the halls of power. After I got discharged, I went back home. I tried to be that boy again. I took a job at the mill. I married a girl named Martha who had eyes like the summer sky, and I raised 3 kids. But every time I saw a sunset that was a little too orange or a flash of light in the distance, I'd be back in that hallway. I'd hear the click of the door. I'd hear the name of that city. Martha used to ask me why I'd go quiet sometimes, why I'd stare at the TV news like I was looking for a ghost. I'd just tell her I was tired. It wasn't a lie. I've been tired for 80 years. I remember one night, maybe it was 1952, during the height of the Cold War. The news was all about the Soviets and their own bombs. People were building shelters in their backyards, and the kids were doing those duck and cover drills at school. My oldest son, Tommy, came home and asked me if we were going to be okay. He was scared. I looked at him, and for a second I saw those men in the manor house. I saw the stars on their shoulders. I wanted to tell him that nobody was ever going to be okay again. Not really. But I just hugged him and told him that as long as we were together, that was all that mattered. I felt like a liar. I've felt like a liar every day since 1945, because I knew that the decision wasn't made out of necessity, not entirely. It was made because they could, because they wanted to see what would happen when they played God. The guilt is a funny thing. It's not that I did anything wrong. I was just a soldier. I followed my orders. I stood where I was told to stand. But being a witness makes you a part of it. When you hear the plans for the fire before the match is even struck, you carry a bit of the soot on your hands forever. I think about the people in that city. I think about the kids who were just like my Tommy, waking up on a Tuesday morning, not knowing that a few men in a quiet room in Germany had already decided they weren't going to have a Wednesday. It makes you look at the world differently. You realize how fragile everything is. You realize that the peace we talk about is often just a thin layer of ice over a very deep, dark ocean. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I never went to Japan. I didn't want to see it. I saw enough of what war does to a landscape in France. I remember the smell of the apple blossoms in Normandy, mixed with the scent of cordite and rotting livestock. It's a smell that never leaves your nose. People talk about the good war, and I suppose it was, in the sense that we were stopping a great evil. But there's no such thing as a clean war. Every victory is paid for in bits and pieces of your soul. By the time I was 25, I felt like an old man. I'd look in the mirror and I wouldn't recognize the person looking back. He looked like Henry Lawson, but the eyes were different. They were the eyes of the man who stood outside the door. I've had a good life, don't get me wrong. I've seen my grandkids grow up. I've buried my friends. And I've watched the world change in ways I never could have imagined. We have phones in our pockets now that have more power than the computers that built those bombs. We can talk to anyone, anywhere, in an instant, but we're still the same people. We're still making the same decisions in quiet rooms. I see it on the news today. The same posturing, the same talk of deterrence and strategic necessity. It's the same language I heard through the oak door. It makes me wonder if we ever really learn anything, or if we're just waiting for the next door to click shut. I'm 92 now, and I don't have much time left. My heart is like an old clock that's missing a few beats here and there. I spend a lot of time sitting on my porch, watching the birds. They don't care about history. They don't care about Potsdam or Hiroshima. They just fly. I envy them. I've carried this weight for so long that I've forgotten what it's like to be light. People ask me why I'm telling this now. Why not just take it to the grave? I suppose it's because I don't want those men to have the last word. I want people to know that the end of history wasn't just a headline. It was a choice. It was a conversation. And there was at least one person there who felt the chill of it, even if he was just a corporal with scuffed boots. I remember the face of a young German boy we captured near Aachen. He couldn't have been more than 15. He was crying, calling for his mother. We were supposed to be the enemies, but I looked at him and I just saw a scared kid. I gave him a piece of chocolate I'd been saving. He looked at me like I was a god. I think about him sometimes. I wonder if he made it. I wonder if he ever knew that while he was crying for his mother, the world was being carved up by men who didn't know his name and never would. That's the truth of war. It's not about the medals or the flags. It's about the people who get caught in the machinery of those quiet rooms. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The night after I heard the conversation, I couldn't sleep. I walked out to the edge of the manor grounds. The moon was out, casting long shadows across the grass. It was so peaceful. You could hear the crickets. It was hard to believe that just a few hundred miles away, cities were in ruins and people were starving. I looked up at the stars and I felt so small. I felt like a grain of sand on a beach that was about to be washed away by a giant wave. I wanted to run. I wanted to go back to Ohio and hide in the barn and never come out. But there's no hiding from the future once you've heard its voice. You just have to walk into it and hope you don't lose too much of yourself along the way. I remember Silas once told me, back when we were still in the States, that he wanted to be a teacher. He said he wanted to tell kids about the world so they wouldn't make the same mistakes we did. He never got the chance. He's buried in a field with a white cross over his head. I often think about what he would have said if he'd been standing at that door with me. He was always the smart one. He probably would have understood it better than I did. Or maybe he would have just played his harmonica until the sound drowned out the voices. Sometimes I wish I had a harmonica. I wish I had something to drown out the memory of that gravelly voice. It's funny how the mind works. I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, but I can tell you the exact shade of the carpet in that hallway. It was a deep red, almost like wine. I remember focusing on a loose thread near the baseboard, trying to tune out the words, but they came through anyway. They were talking about the moral implications for a minute, but then someone laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh, just a dismissive one, like the morality was a small detail that they'd get around to later. That laugh. That was the worst part. It told me everything I needed to know about how the world was going to be run from then on. It was going to be run by people who could laugh while they decided which cities would burn. I've never told my kids the full story. I told them I was a soldier, that I saw some things, but I kept the manor house out of it. I didn't want them to have to carry it. I wanted them to grow up in the world they thought was real. But they're older now. They have their own kids. And the world is getting louder again. I see the look in people's eyes, that same uncertainty I felt in 1945. Maybe that's why I'm talking. Not to be a hero, because God knows I'm not, but just to be a witness, to say that it happened, to say that the choices we make in the dark always come to light, eventually. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I think back to the day I left Potsdam. We were piled into the back of a deuce and a half, heading toward a new assignment. The sun was shining, and some of the guys were singing. They were happy. They thought the worst was over. I sat at the tailboard, watching the dust kick up from the road. I felt like I was 1,000 years old. I looked at the ruins of the German towns we passed, and I didn't see enemies anymore. I just saw people who had been lived in by a dream that turned into a nightmare. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that we were just starting a new kind of dream, one that could end with a flash brighter than 1,000 mornings. I don't hate those men in the room. I've lived long enough to know that everyone thinks they're doing the right thing. They thought they were saving American lives. They thought they were ending the war. And maybe they were. But at what cost? We're still paying the bill for that decision. Every time we look at the sky and wonder if it's going to fall, we're paying. Every time we teach our children to be afraid of people they've never met, we're paying. I've been paying for 80 years, just by knowing, when my time comes and I'm standing at whatever door is waiting for me, I hope I can leave the secret behind. I hope I can finally be just Henry Lawson again, The boy who liked to fish in the creek and thought the world was a big, beautiful place. I want to find Silas and see him playing that harmonica. I want to tell him that I tried to remember. I want to tell him that I didn't forget the man on my left or the man on my right. And maybe, if I'm lucky, I'll finally be able to sleep without hearing the click of that oak door. I'm tired now. My hands are shaking as I write this. Or well, as I tell this to the machine. It's a lot of words for an old soldier, but they've been bottled up for so long. I hope whoever hears this understands that it's not a history lesson. It's a warning. Watch the doors. Listen to the silences. Because that's where the world is decided. Not on the battlefields, but in the hallways. Not with a bang, but with a conversation. And if you're lucky, you'll never have to hear it. You'll just get to live in the world they leave behind. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember a time, just after I got home, when I went for a walk in the woods behind our house. It was a crisp autumn day, and the leaves were turning gold. I sat down on a stump and just listened. For the first time in years, there was no shouting, no engines, no voices behind doors. There was just the wind. I realized then that the world is much bigger than our wars and our secrets. It has a way of breathing that doesn't depend on us. That gave me a little bit of peace. I tried to hold on to that feeling over the years, even when the memories got loud. I tried to remember that even if we break the world, the wind will still blow through the trees. But then I'd go into town and see the newspapers. I'd see the faces of the leaders, the same confident expressions, the same talk of power. And I'd realize that the men in the woods are always outnumbered by the men in the hallways. It's a hard thing to live with. You want to believe that we're getting better, that we're growing up as a species. But then you hear a voice through a door and you realize we're still just children playing with matches. Only now, the matches can burn down the whole house. I don't have many regrets. I loved my wife. I'm proud of my kids. I did my duty, but I wish I hadn't been so quiet. I wish I'd found a way to tell people what it felt like to stand in that hallway. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. Probably not. But at least I wouldn't have felt so alone with it. That's why I'm talking now, I guess. So I don't have to be alone with it anymore. So you can carry a little piece of it too. Not to burden you, but to make you look a little closer at the world around you. To make you ask the questions I was too afraid to ask. There was a moment, just as I was leaving my post that day in Potsdam, when one of the generals stopped. He looked at me, really looked at me, for about 3 seconds. I thought he was going to say something. I thought he might see the fear in my eyes and tell me it was going to be okay. But he just adjusted his cap and walked on. He didn't see a person. He saw a part of the scenery. That's what we were to them, just parts of the scenery. And the people in Hiroshima? They were just coordinates on a map. We have to be more than that. We have to see each other, truly see each other. Because if we don't, then the men behind the doors have already won. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The boat ride back to the States was the quietest time of my life, and that's saying something, considering I'd spent the last year in a landscape where the world was constantly screaming. We were packed onto a transport ship, thousands of us, swaying in the gray Atlantic swell. Most of the boys were playing cards or talking about the steaks they were going to eat. But I just sat by the railing, staring at the water. I had that gravelly voice from the Potsdam Manor stuck in my head like a piece of shrapnel you can't dig out. I kept looking at the guys around me, men who had crawled through the mud of the Hurtgen forest, men who had seen their friends turned into nothing by a direct hit from an 88, and I felt a terrible sort of pity for them. They thought they were coming home to the world they left behind. They thought the victory was ours, bought and paid for with our blood and our grit. They didn't know that the rules had changed while they were sleeping in foxholes. They didn't know that a new kind of power had been unleashed, a power that made all our sacrifices feel like a footnote in a much darker book. I remember a kid from Nebraska named Miller. He was barely 19, with ears that stuck out and a smile that could light up a rainy afternoon. He'd lost 2 toes to frostbite during the bulge, but he was the happiest soul on that ship. He'd sit next to me and talk about his father's farm, about how the soil felt between your fingers after a spring rain. He wanted to know what I was going to do when we hit New York. I'd just shrug and tell him I'd probably find work at the mill. I couldn't tell him that I felt like a ghost. I couldn't tell him that I'd heard the men with the stars on their shoulders laughing about the end of history, How do you tell a kid who just survived hell that the world he's returning to is now standing on a trapdoor? You don't. You keep your mouth shut and you watch the waves. The winter of '44 had been a different kind of misery. Before I ever stood outside that room in Potsdam, I was just another body in the freezing woods of the Ardennes. People talk about the glory of the Battle of the Bulge, but there wasn't any glory in it. There was just the cold. A cold so deep it felt like it was trying to eat your bones. We were low on ammunition, low on food, and our boots were always wet. I remember sitting in a hole I'd scraped out of the frozen earth, sharing a single cold can of beans with a guy named Cooper. We didn't talk. We just listened to the trees snapping under the weight of the snow and the distant thud of artillery. At that moment, a single rifle bullet was the most important thing in the world. It was the difference between life and death. I didn't know then that while we were fighting for every yard of frozen ground, scientists in a desert thousands of miles away were building something that would make our rifles obsolete before the ink on the peace treaty was even dry. It makes you feel small. It makes you realize that the man in the foxhole is always the last to know and the first to pay. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember one night in the forest, just before the Germans launched their big counteroffensive. It was so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat. I was on watch, staring into the dark, trying to make sense of the shadows. I saw something move near a cluster of pine trees. I raised my M1, my finger tight on the trigger, my breath coming in short, white puffs. A figure stepped out into a patch of moonlight. It was a German soldier, but he wasn't much older than Miller. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He was just holding his hands over his ears, rocking back and forth. He'd cracked. The war had finally broken his mind. I should have called it in, or I should have shot him. That's what the training says. But I just lowered my rifle. I watched him for a long time. He looked like a lost child. I realized then that we were all just kids being chewed up by a machine we didn't understand. I let him wander back into the trees. I never told anyone. In that moment, in that freezing wood, I felt more human than I ever did standing outside that study in Potsdam. Because in the woods, I had a choice. In the woods, I could choose mercy. But the men in that room, they weren't interested in mercy. They were interested in results. When the news of Hiroshima finally reached us in the occupation zone, it wasn't like it was in the movies. There wasn't a sudden silence or a big dramatic speech. It was just a rumor at first. Something passed around the mess hall like a bad joke. A single bomb that destroyed a whole city? Nobody believed it. We'd seen what it took to take a single village, the weeks of shelling, the house-to-house fighting, the piles of empty casings. The idea that you could do all that in a second was impossible. But then the photographs started coming out. The shadows burned into the pavement, the black rain. I saw the faces of the officers when they looked at those pictures. They weren't horrified, they were impressed. That's the thing that still keeps me awake at 92. The look of satisfaction on the faces of the men who didn't have to pull the trigger. They liked the efficiency of it. I think about the people who worked on that bomb. I'm sure they thought they were doing the right thing. They wanted to go home too. They wanted the war to end. But did they know what they were handing over? Did they know that they were giving a handful of men the power to erase 1 million lives with a single word? I stood in that hallway and I heard that word. It wasn't spoken with malice. It was spoken with the cold calculation of a bookkeeper. That's what haunts me. It's the lack of emotion. When I was in France and we had to clear a cellar, we knew who was in there. We could hear them breathing. We knew that if we threw a grenade, we were ending a specific life. There was a weight to it. But when you're talking about a city from 30,000 feet or from a comfortable room in Germany, the weight disappears. It becomes an abstraction. And once life becomes an abstraction, you've lost the war, even if you've won the fight. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. After the war, I tried to talk to my father about it. He'd been in the Great War, in the trenches. He had his own ghosts. We were sitting on the porch back in Ohio, the fireflies jumping in the grass. I tried to tell him about the manor house, about the feeling I had that the world was changed forever. He just smoked his pipe and looked out at the fields. He told me, "Henry, the world is always changing. Men have been finding new ways to kill each other since we lived in caves. Don't let it get to you. You're home now. That's all that matters." But he was wrong. It wasn't just a new way to kill, it was a new way to be afraid. In his war, you were afraid of the gas or the machine gun, but you knew where it was coming from. You could see the enemy across the wire. In the world I heard being born in Potsdam, the enemy could be anywhere, and the death could come from the sun itself. I spent years looking at every person I met and wondering what they would do if they were the ones behind that door. Would they be the one to say Hiroshima? Would they be the one to laugh? I'd be in the grocery store and I'd see a man in a nice suit and I'd think, he looks like he could make a decision like that. It makes you cynical. It makes you pull away from people. My Martha, she was the only one who could bring me back. She'd see me drifting off, my eyes fixed on something she couldn't see, and she'd just take my hand. She didn't ask questions, she just held on. I think she knew that there were parts of me that stayed in Europe, parts that were still standing guard in a red-carpeted hallway, listening to the death of the old world. I remember a specific day in May 45, just after the surrender. We were in a small German village, and the locals were coming out of their cellars. They looked like skeletons draped in rags. There was an old woman who came up to me and offered me a single withered apple. It was probably the only food she had left. She didn't speak English, and I didn't speak German, but she just looked at me with these eyes that had seen everything. I took the apple, and I felt like a criminal. We had destroyed her world to save our own, and here she was, offering me the last bit of life she had. I wonder what happened to her when she heard about the bomb. I wonder if she realized that the liberators had a weapon that could turn her whole village into ash in the blink of an eye. Did she still think we were the good guys? Do we even deserve to be called that anymore? If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. The older I get, the more the memories of the actual fighting fade, and the memories of the quiet moments grow louder. I can't remember the names of all the towns we took, but I remember the way the light hit the dust in that manor house. I remember the way the gravelly voice paused before saying the name of the target. It was a pause of maybe 2 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. In those 2 seconds, thousands of lives were hanging in the balance, and then he said it, and the balance tipped. I've lived 28,000 days since then, and I've never forgotten those 2 seconds of silence. It was the silence of a God deciding who gets to live and who gets to die. I see the world today, and I see people arguing about things that seem so small. They argue about politics, about money, about who said what to whom. They don't realize how lucky they are to have the luxury of those arguments. They don't realize that they're living in the shadow of a giant. We've become so used to the idea of total destruction that we don't even think about it anymore. It's just part of the background noise. But for me, it's never been background noise. It's always been the main event. Ever since that day in July 1945, I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop. I've been waiting for the men in the quiet rooms to have another conversation. Sometimes I think about the pilots of the Enola Gay. I wonder if they knew. They said they were just doing their jobs, and I believe them. I was just doing my job too. But there's a difference between doing your job with a rifle and doing your job with a sunmaker. I don't blame them, but I wonder how they slept. Did they hear voices through doors? Or did they just see the clouds? I think I'd rather be the guy in the mud, facing the enemy eye to eye, than the guy who drops the end of history from 6 miles up. At least in the mud, you know you're a man. Up there, you're just a part of the machine. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember Silas had this harmonica, like I told you. He wasn't very good at it, to be honest. He knew about 3 songs, and he always missed the high notes. But when the world was falling apart, those 3 songs were the most beautiful thing I'd ever heard. They were human, they were flawed, they were small. Everything about that war was big. Big tanks, big planes, big bombs, big leaders. But Silas and his harmonica, that was small. And that's what we were fighting for, wasn't it? The right to be small. The right to live our lives in our little towns, with our little problems and our little songs. But the secret I heard in Potsdam took that away. It made everything big. It made everyone a target. It turned the whole planet into a battlefield where there's nowhere to hide. I remember standing in line for my discharge papers. There was a sergeant there, a regular army guy who'd been in since the 30s. He looked at me and said, "Lawson, you look like you've seen a ghost. Go home, get drunk, and forget all of this." I didn't tell him that you can't forget something that's rewritten your DNA. I didn't tell him that I was carrying a secret that made his medals look like bottle caps. I just took my papers, walked out the gate, and never looked back. But the manor house followed me. It followed me to the mill. It followed me to the church. It followed me to the hospital when my children were born. It's been my constant companion for 80 years. I'm 92 now, and my eyes aren't what they used to be. The world looks a bit blurry around the edges. But that red-carpeted hallway is as clear as it was in 1945. I can see the dust motes dancing in the light. I can hear the creak of the floorboards under my boots. And I can hear that laugh, that soft, dismissive laugh that said, "Morality is for later." I've come to realize that later never comes. We just keep pushing it further down the road, hoping that the next generation will be the one to figure it out. But I'm looking at the end of the road now, and I can tell you, there's nobody there to catch us. We have to figure it out now. We have to stop being the people who laugh in quiet rooms and start being the people who listen to the wind in the trees. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I've spent a lot of my life feeling guilty for not being a hero. I was just a corporal who overheard something he shouldn't have. I didn't charge any machine gun nests single-handedly. I didn't save my platoon from an ambush. I just stood there. But maybe being a witness is a kind of service too. Maybe holding onto a truth that nobody wants to hear is a way of honoring the people who didn't make it back. Silas, Miller, Cooper, they all died thinking they were saving a world that was going back to normal. I owe it to them to tell the truth. The world didn't go back to normal. It went forward into the dark. I remember a priest I talked to once back in the 50s. I didn't tell him everything, but I asked him if a man could be forgiven for knowing something terrible and not being able to stop it. He looked at me with a lot of kindness and said, "Henry, we aren't gods. We can only do what's in front of us. If you did your duty and you treated your fellow man with respect, then you have nothing to fear." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But then I'd think about those 2 seconds of silence in the hallway, and I'd wonder if God was in that room too. And if he was, why didn't he say anything? Why did he let the door click shut? It's a strange thing, reaching this age. You become a living relic. People look at me and they see the greatest generation. They see the flag and the uniform. They don't see the kid who threw up behind a supply shed. They don't see the man who's been afraid of the sun for 80 years. They want the story to be simple. They want it to be about good versus evil and a clear-cut victory. But history isn't simple. It's messy, and it's cold, and it's full of secrets that burn. I'm tired of the simple stories. I think we're all old enough now to hear the complicated ones. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I think about the German boy in the woods again. I wonder if he's still alive. He'd be about my age now. I wonder if he remembers the American corporal who let him go. I wonder if he found his mother. In the end, that's all that matters, isn't it? Those tiny moments of connection in the middle of all the madness. Those are the things that the men in the quiet rooms can't touch. They can destroy cities, but they can't destroy the fact that I gave a kid a piece of chocolate. They can't destroy the fact that Silas played his harmonica. They can't destroy the love I have for my Martha. Those things are small, but they're solid. They're the only things that are real. I'm sitting here on my porch, and the sun is starting to set. It's a beautiful orange, the kind that used to make me nervous. But today, it just looks like a sunset. I think I'm finally letting go. I've told the secret. I've opened the box. The air feels a little bit lighter. I don't know what happens next, for me or for the world, but I know that I've done what I could. I've been a witness. I've remembered the names that the maps forgot, and maybe that's enough for one life. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember the way the smoke from those cigars curled under the gap of that heavy oak door. It looked like tiny gray ghosts escaping a prison. Most people think of history as something that happens in books or on the news, but I saw it as a wisp of smoke and a smell of expensive tobacco. That smell stayed in my wool uniform for weeks. Even after I washed it in a cold stream with some harsh lye soap, I could still catch a hint of it. It was the smell of men who didn't have to worry about where their next meal was coming from. It was the smell of power. I stood there, my back straight, my eyes fixed on the opposite wall, but my mind was inside that room. They started talking about the Soviets. That's what stayed with me. They weren't just thinking about the Japanese, they were thinking about the Russians. One of the voices, a man who sounded like he'd never had a hair out of place in his life, said that this new weapon would be the ultimate argument. He said that once the world saw what we could do, nobody would ever dare to challenge us again. I remember thinking how naive that sounded, even to a 22-year-old corporal. I'd seen the Germans fight for every inch of dirt when they knew they were already beaten. I'd seen men fight out of pure, raw desperation. You don't stop people like that with an argument. You only make them more desperate. But those men in the room, they didn't see desperation. They saw a chessboard. And Hiroshima was just a move to keep the king in check. I think about the ultimate argument every time I see the news today. We've been arguing for 80 years, and the weapons have only gotten bigger. I wonder if that man with the smooth voice ever realized how wrong he was. Or maybe he didn't care. Maybe the goal wasn't peace at all. Maybe the goal was just to be the one holding the biggest stick. I stayed on that guard duty for 4 hours. My feet were throbbing, and my shoulder ached from the weight of the rifle. But I didn't want to leave. I felt like if I stayed, I could somehow absorb more of the truth, like I could gather enough evidence to make sense of the madness. But the more I heard, the less sense it made. They talked about acceptable casualties. They talked about the radius of the blast in terms of city blocks, not people, blocks. It's easier to burn a block than it is to burn 1,000 families, at least when you're talking about it behind a closed door. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drop my rifle and walk into that room and ask them if they'd ever seen a block bleed, if they'd ever heard a block cry out for its mother. But I was a good soldier. I stood my post. I kept my mouth shut. And I let the ghosts of the future drift past my boots. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. When I finally got back to my barracks that night, I couldn't look at my buddies. We were supposed to be the heroes, the liberators of Europe. We'd just liberated a death camp 3 weeks earlier. I still remember the eyes of the survivors, hollow, dark pits that looked like they'd seen the bottom of the universe. We thought we were the light coming into that darkness. But after hearing those men in the manor, I felt like the light was just a different kind of fire. I sat on my bunk and cleaned my rifle. It was a mechanical habit, something to keep my hands busy. I looked at the wood of the stock, worn smooth by my own palms, and I wondered if it even mattered anymore. What was one rifle against a sunmaker? What was one soldier against a weapon that could erase a zip code? It made all our training, all our drills, all our over-there bravado feel like a stage play. We were just extras in a movie we hadn't been cast in. I felt a deep, biting resentment toward those men in the study. They were stealing our victory. They were turning our hard-won peace into a countdown. I remember a guy in my platoon named Henderson. He was a big, boisterous guy from Chicago, always telling jokes, always the first to find a bottle of wine in a cellar. He noticed I was quiet. He came over and sat on the edge of his bunk, looking at me. "Lawson," he said, "you look like you've been eating lemons. We won, kid. The Krauts are done. We're going home." I looked at him, at his big, honest face, and I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say, "Henderson, we're not going home to the same world. We're going home to a world where we're all just targets." But I didn't. I just told him I was tired. It was the same lie I'd tell for the rest of my life. Tired. It's a good word. It covers a lot of ground. It covers the guilt, the fear, and the weight of a secret you can't share. Henderson just laughed and patted me on the back. He didn't know that he was one of the acceptable casualties the men in the room had been talking about. He didn't know that his life was just a statistic on a map. I've often wondered if Truman knew I was there. Probably not. To him, I was just part of the architecture, a green uniform with a helmet. But I wonder if he ever thought about the soldiers standing outside the doors. Did he wonder if we were listening? Did he care? I think leaders have to turn off that part of their brain. They have to stop seeing people as individuals and start seeing them as resources. It's a survival mechanism for them, I suppose. If you really thought about the faces of the children in the cities you were planning to burn, you wouldn't be able to eat your dinner. You wouldn't be able to laugh at a joke, but they did. I heard them. That's the thing that gets me. They could switch it off. I've been trying to switch it off for 80 years, and I've never found the dial. It's always there, humming in the background. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember the day we got word about the Trinity test. It was just a whisper at first, a big event in New Mexico. We didn't know what it meant, but the officers were different. They had a spring in their step. They looked like they'd just inherited a fortune. I saw a colonel I'd once seen crying over a lost company, and he was whistling. He was whistling a jaunty little tune as he walked across the muddy parade ground. That's when I knew for sure that something fundamental had shifted. The tragedy of war was being replaced by the triumph of technology. We weren't mourning our dead anymore. We were celebrating our machines. It made me feel sick. I thought about Silas and his harmonica. I thought about the kid in the woods. I thought about the millions of people who had died in the mud, thinking their sacrifice meant something. And it did. It meant we had survived long enough to build a better way to die. After the war, when I was back in Ohio, I'd see the movies they made about us. They were all about the courage and the glory. I'd sit in the dark theater holding Martha's hand, and I'd feel like I was watching a story about a different planet. They never showed the quiet rooms. They never showed the men with the cigars. They just showed the flags and the charging infantry. I wanted to stand up and shout at the screen, "That's not how it happened. It happened in a hallway with a red carpet." But I just sat there and let the images wash over me. I let everyone believe the simple story. It was easier that way. If people knew how the decisions were really made, they'd never be able to sleep again. They'd realize that their lives are held in the hands of people who see them as blocks on a map. My son Tommy followed me into the service. He went to Vietnam. When he came home, he was different. He had that same hollow look in his eyes that I'd seen in the camps. He didn't want to talk about it. We'd sit on the porch together, 2 generations of soldiers, and we'd just be silent. I wanted to tell him that I understood. I wanted to tell him that the war he fought was just the continuation of the conversation I heard in 1945. It was the same men, different names, the same logic, different geography, but I didn't want to poison his mind. I wanted him to believe that his struggle was unique, that his sacrifice was for something specific. I didn't want him to know that he was just another move in a game that never ends. We just sat there and watched the fireflies, 2 ghosts sharing a porch. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I think the reason I'm finally opening up is because I see the same patterns repeating. I see the world getting smaller, and the weapons getting smarter, and the men in the rooms getting more confident. They talk about surgical strikes and low-yield explosives. They use clean words to describe dirty things. It's the same language I heard through the oak door. It's the language of people who don't have to clean up the mess. I'm 92 years old and I'm tired of the clean words. I want people to hear the dirty truth. I want them to know that when a city disappears, it's not a strategic necessity. It's a tragedy that echoes for generations. It's a hole in the heart of the world that never fills up. I remember a dream I had a few years ago. I was back in that hallway, standing guard. The door was open this time. I walked inside. The room was empty, but it was filled with light. A blinding white light that didn't have a source. I looked down at my hands, and they were turning into ash. I wasn't afraid. I just felt a deep sense of relief. Like I was finally becoming part of the secret. Like I didn't have to carry it anymore. I woke up sweating, my heart racing, but I felt that same relief for a second. I realized that the secret isn't just something I know, it's something I am. I'm a witness to the moment we stepped across the line. And once you step across that line, there's no going back. You just keep walking into the white light. I don't have much to show for my time on this earth. I have some medals in a drawer that I never look at. I have some old photos of guys whose names I can't always remember. I have a house that's too big for me and a garden that's mostly weeds. But I have this memory, I have this truth, and I'm handing it to you. Do with it what you will. Forget it if you want. Go back to your life and your problems and your small arguments. But every now and then, when you look at the sun or when you hear a door click shut, think about a 22-year-old corporal in a red-carpeted hallway. Think about the gravelly voice and the smooth one. Think about the name of a city you've never seen. And remember that the world we live in was decided by men who laughed while they burned the map. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I'm going to sit here on my porch for a while longer. The birds are finishing their songs for the day. The shadows are getting long. I think about Martha. I hope she's waiting for me somewhere. I hope she's in a place where there are no secrets and no quiet rooms. I want to tell her everything I couldn't say for 60 years. I want to tell her that she was the only thing that kept me from drifting away into the gray smoke. I want to be a boy again, fishing in the creek, not knowing that there's such a thing as a bomb or a Potsdam. I want to be light, God, I want to be light. The world is a beautiful place. If you look at it from the right angle, it's full of small things that matter. A piece of chocolate, a harmonica tune, a sunset. We have to protect those things. We have to be the ones standing outside the doors, not just to guard them, but to make sure they never close again. We have to listen. We have to remember. Because if we don't, the conversation will just keep going. And the next time they laugh, there might not be anyone left to hear it. This is Henry Lawson, signing off for the last time. Thank you for listening to an old man's ghosts. I hope they don't haunt you too much, but I hope they stay with you. Just enough to make you look twice at the light. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten. I remember the last thing I heard before my relief arrived that day in 1945. It was the sound of a glass clinking against a decanter. A simple domestic sound. The sound of a man pouring himself a drink after a long day's work. It was so ordinary. That was the most terrifying part. The most earth-shaking decisions in history were made by men who were worried about their scotch and their dinner reservations. They didn't feel the weight of the world. They only felt the weight of their own ambition. As I marched away, my boots rhythmic on the stone floor, I felt like I was walking away from my own innocence. I was no longer just a kid from Ohio. I was a part of the machine. I was a witness. And I've been marching ever since. I've lived through 15 presidents, 3 wars, and the birth of the internet. I've seen the world get faster and louder. But in the quiet moments, I'm still there. I'm still standing in that hallway. I'm still 22. I'm still listening. And I think, in a way, we all are. We're all standing in that hallway, whether we know it or not. We're all waiting to see what the men in the room decide next. The only difference is, I know what they're capable of. I've heard the laugh. And I'm telling you, it's a sound you never want to hear. Keep your eyes open, watch the smoke, and for God's sake, don't let them close the door. If you're still listening to my story, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button and subscribe. It means these memories won't be forgotten.